Hello and welcome back around the bonfire to the show, reminding you that chili just doesn't belong on noodles. That's not where it should go, and it should stay in two separate bowls. It's wonderful to be here on a shiny Chicago Thursday. We're recording a little bit late this week, but it's a pleasure to be here. We're so glad to be back. I've got two of the best in the business with me, as always. Tim joins me from his lair somewhere deep underground, I'm sure. Tim, how are you feeling today?
I'm clearly an underwater layer kind of guy. I don't know why. I'm a little insulted right now, to be honest. But other than that, I'm good.
Is an underwater layer not an underground layer?
No, not necessarily.
But
if it's in a subterranean, if it's in a like under the water cave, sure. But like you could just have like a like underground layer in a like dome or bubble kind of situation.
Well, the good news is we have our underwater cave expert here. DJ, how are we feeling about underwater caves today?
Are you saying I like to dive into small holes? Is that the Instagram reel we're going with?
Cut that one out for me. We're gonna
boy, we're less than a minute and we're already off the rails. All right, it's already holiday weekend for everybody apparently.
Jesus.
For reference, for the last 6 months, all I've seen on Instagram for anything canning is people diving into like little itty bitty holes.
And everyone literally like spelunking. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
what did you think I was talking about?
DJ's here as well. DJ, great to have you as always, brother. We are here to talk a little bit of Chicago Fire football. Before we do that, just a touch of news, nothing too crazy. In positive news, Romani Kwame was back in training. Carlos Terran did not feature in training today. Kellen Acosta was ruled out today as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later on.
And just to be clear about that, Greg did tell us that we will not be seeing Kwame this week in the match. So
yes. I think that was still encouraging. Yeah, sorry, I should have clarified that, Tim. Still encouraging to see him back in full training with the squad. I feel like this is the first time in a little bit that we've seen him in regular participation. So hopefully he will be back in short order. Moving on, the United States men's national team has advanced to the Gold Cup final against Mexico. That will be this Sunday. Offhand, I would think 6 o'clock Eastern time, or 6 o'clock Central time, 7 o'clock Eastern, if I'm remembering my timings correctly, but I may be off.
You're right.
Yeah, wonderful. Yep. Maybe not a wonderful way, but a way to advance on the back of Diego Luna, who many people have called the next Brian Gutierrez. I don't know. They're pretty interchangeable in some ways, I think.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I lost that Twitter argument a year and a half later. That sucked. Anyway, there are some more pressing things in mind, though, that being the Chicago Fire heading out to Cincinnati this week to take on Evander and friends as they look to avenge, I should say, a loss that they faced at home early in the year. Just a quick little recap on the way that game turned out. The Fire did lose 3-2 at home against Cincinnati. Evander had a brace in his first return to action. Denke added another goal as well after beating Sam Rogers in the box off an easy turnover following an injury to Carlos Terran. Hugo Kuipers and Brian Gutierrez added goals for the Fire, but Guti's 85th minute penalty was just too little too late. Tim, I actually think maybe a little bit of an interesting conversation to kick off what this matchup could look like is kind of how the last one went, right? You look at kind of the underlying stats, Chicago 2.34 expected goals, Cincinnati 1.05. Cincinnati obviously got that first goal off of Mauricio Pineda being tripped and eventually, by the referee, I should say. And eventually, Sergio Orahel actually deflecting Evander's attempt over the head of Chris Brady. So I am kind of curious, just your thoughts, like looking back, how you feel that bodes for what this next matchup will look like.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, right. Like that was the Fire's first loss at home on the year. The two previous losses were in New York or New Jersey, technically, and in Columbus. And I think that they should have confidence based on the way that they played that game, right? Like they played a game that they could have won. They were making some simple, very easy to prevent. I mean, for professional athletes that are in the system, right? Mistakes. And I think that it was just new in the system still. Kings were getting worked out. That's when we had such a rotating cast with the midfield. Sam Rogers was kind of like working his way to MLS speed and getting used to the league and stuff like that still. So it looks like we're in a different place now.
That game, right? For reference, he wasn't expecting to play, and then Carlos Terran went out. That was immediately following that stellar performance he put on against Miami.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's like, it's difficult to come in cold. I think it's your responsibility as an athlete to be ready to do that. And everyone will say that. And like, I'm sure that Sam Rogers would say that too, but like, it's still another thing to do that you're not planning on, right? Just mentally. And it does make it harder. But like, some other things like I think Orahel was kind of responsible for a couple turnovers. Like, I think that his game has gotten cleaned up since then. And like the Pineda, depending on how you watch it, like at the time, I thought that the ref tripped him up. Rewatching it a bunch of times, I think it was just as much a case of like him tripping over the ref, and maybe that's why it wasn't called. But it's still an unusual occurrence, right? And like not something that we're going to see every week. So I think the Fire can get a result. Like Cincinnati have been good at home, but like the Fire have been good on the road, and there's no reason to think that they couldn't end up with the game kind of like at their feet here.
100%. And I think kind of maybe interesting to talk a little bit about where they were then and where everyone is now, right? I mentioned before, but last meeting was the first reappearance of Matt Miazga and Evander for FC Cincinnati following some injuries for both. And then for the Fire, obviously Carlos Terran going out early in the game around the 20th minute. That was one of the games that Omari Glasgow started at right back. Apologies for my stutter there. Obviously with Jonathan Dean and Leonardo Barroso both being out due to injury. This time around, things are largely the same. The Fire were riding a little bit higher off the back of that draw against Miami, obviously that early 3-game road win stretch. Now the Fire sits, as we discussed earlier in the week, they're 8-4-7, 8 wins, 4 draws, 7 losses. That's 28 points. They are firmly in a postseason spot for now, but they have the second most goals scored in MLS, only behind San Diego, and they lead the Eastern Conference. You look at Cincinnati, 12 wins, 3 draws, 5 losses, 39 points, second in the East and third in the Supporter Shield standing, and they're coming off the back of another 3-game road win streak, right? So they went into New England, Montreal, and Orlando, maybe not the stiffest of competition, but they won all 3 games on the road. Evander is playing at an MVP level. I think, I don't know if I can say friend of the show, but I'll say it because why not? Friend of the show, Tom Bogert, threw Evander at the top of his midseason MVP rankings this week, which was an interesting article. No mention of Philip Zinkernagel, by the way. We'll have to remedy that at some point. But you look at the form of both teams. The bright side for the Fire coming into this game: Luca Orejano, Sergio Santos, Eric Hogland, and Yuka Kubo, all expected to be out. Fire still missing, obviously, Carlos Terran, Chris Brady, and Christopher Cupps. And now we know...
Did you just combine Carlos Terran and Kevin De Bruyne into some kind of like freak super soccer player athlete in your head?
If I did, I didn't mean to, but that's totally possible.
The greatest player that will never play from an injury.
Excuse me. Carlos Terran, Christopher Brady,
good,
Christopher Cupps, Romani Kwame, and Kellen Acosta all out for the Fire. So both teams kind of at different spots missing key players. But Cincinnati seems to have the key guys in hand, being Evander and Denke, who both have 11 goals on the year, which is pretty remarkable when you consider it from that perspective. And that brings us to kind of the main topic here, right? Which is, as you mentioned before, the Fire led in possession, led in expected goals. They had double the number of shots inside the box as Cincinnati in the first matchup and still lost. What do we think needs to change this time around? We saw a really standout performance from Brian Gutierrez against Charlotte. Do you think there could be a switch moving him higher up the field to be more involved in the attack? We've seen Mauricio Pineda start to lose time, not playing a lot of these second halves recently. Could there be some switch up in the midfield? Tim, I'll kind of kick to you in terms of what you think Greg could do adjustment-wise to set the team up better to finish ahead this time.
So I think something that we've seen is Greg kind of has the players that he thinks are the best for the position. And if they're available for minutes, then they're going to be playing those minutes, right? He's talked about the need to get Bamba off as quickly as possible and limit his minutes, but I think he still thinks he's the best option the team has on the left wing. I think that we'll stick to basically the same 4-3-3. I think they just need to be, it's about alertness of like, what is it Cincinnati's going to try to do, right? And I think that they're aware of that from having played them earlier this year. It's the same kind of stuff, right? Like they're comfortable playing without the ball. They're comfortable being very quick in transition. They've got a bunch of very quick players. I mean, the absences are certainly going to hurt them, but two players that have 22 goals between them up top is nothing to sneeze at, like especially this time of year. And I think that's really what hurt the Fire before. Overall, Cincinnati are outperforming their XG differential by like 10. So like they've got a negative XG differential if you look at the model. With it looks like the model says they should have conceded 5 more than they've scored. In reality, they've scored 5 more than they've conceded. The Fire are a little bit closer on each, but they're also kind of beating their average. I think that game against DC really helps with that, to be honest. But the reason that Cincinnati are doing it is largely because they have absolute difference makers in the attack and are able to take fewer chances and get something out of them, and then smother teams going back the other way with a strong defense playing 3 center backs that are used to the spacing of that system, that know exactly how to close spaces down and stuff like that, and give Roman Celentano an easier job than I think some of the shot locations would suggest, because he's got time to be in the right position. He doesn't have to worry about a pass or a cross going somewhere. So he can be where he needs to be to stop those goals. And I think it just is awareness that that's what you're facing, that and playing within this system with that in mind, that's going to make the difference.
Yeah, I think for a team that is so reliant on inducing the counterattack, right? That's, I think, where we've seen the Fire be their best this season. Drawing in defenses either in the midfield or in that back line, kind of playing with the ball at their feet and then trying to break out. This is kind of a nightmare matchup in some ways, right? You talked to him about the back three, kind of how dynamic those guys are. Even with Haglund and Kubo out, like you still have Matt Miazga back there. You still have multiple guys who are comfortable in the system, like Gilberto Flores, young guys, right, who are athletic, who are fast, who can move. And then you look at their fullbacks, right? I'm not the biggest fan of Lucas Engel, but like I'm not going to sit here and pretend like he's not a talented player. We know what DeAndre Edlin is. We know who he can be. And in MLS, that's a pretty high-level fullback, right? You don't even take into account his attacking prowess. You just think about the speed he offers in recovery, the ability he has to win balls back, in the midfield and in the defensive third. I think in some ways, it needs to be a little bit more of a possession dominant game. And that's what we saw last time. We just kind of, we didn't see that finishing touch that you would hope to see. And to your point, Tim, that may be a little bit more about the ability of the center backs to give Roman Celentano favorable looks against unfavorable shot targets, if that makes sense.
Although, I don't think we talked about this that much, but they'll also be out Miles Robinson, who's with the U.S. men's national team. And like, Chris Brady, it's a frustrating situation. He did play for a couple minutes, I think in the group stages. I don't think he got any minutes in the friendlies, but hasn't really been playing as the team has been advancing. So it's like, if you're an FC Cincinnati fan, much like it is for Fire fans, like someone that is a key part of your team is not available to help your team win on Saturday, and then they're not going to be helping make a contribution on Sunday. So like that's, I think, one of the frustrating things about having this tournament go on during the regular season, or the regular season go on during the tournament, depending on how you want to look at it. But like it's a deep center back core, but like no team is that deep, right? Like Hagelin has been out pretty much all year. Like they lost Matt Miazga, pretty much all of last year. And so it is going to be testing their depth a little bit. And it's like Alvis Powell is probably going to be starting in Miles Robinson's place, would be my assumption. He's sort of one of the players in that like right fullback position that really is more like a wing back some of the time, that can play in that role. And so like, it moves the pieces around the board a little bit. So I guess everyone get ready to see some DeAndre Edlin or maybe Luke Oriano, but he's more a locked in guy on the left, if we're being honest.
Yeah, I do think I mean, at least the last thing I saw that could have been updated, I do think Luca Orejano is going to be out. And then looking back at just who they've started recently in their most recent matchup against Orlando City, and I apologize, I don't know if I'm saying his name properly, but Tanage Lingani Hadebe started alongside Roberto Flores.
Teenage Hadebe is what everyone called him.
Teenage? I was like, there's no way that's how that's pronounced. Yep. Sorry about that, everybody. Teenage Hadebe starting alongside Gilberto Flores in center, and then Matt Miazga on the right in terms of that back three. And then obviously Lucas Engel on the left, DeAndre Edlin on the right, both of whom played just about the entirety of the game. And it almost, to an extent, right, doesn't matter when you have Kevin Denke and Evander sitting up front, ready to put the ball in the back of the net. And I think that is, from my perspective, almost more important than the actual scoring of it all, right? Which would be, we've seen Sam Rogers really, really struggle against strong, athletic center forwards because he just doesn't quite have the physicality to keep up with it. That's, I think, one of the big pluses we saw out of Christopher Cupps, surprisingly enough, being that he's 17 years old, is he was able to play a little bit more physical, a little bit more aggressive. And so it almost feels like that may be something we need to focus a little bit more on in the defensive side of, you don't necessarily have somebody on the right side who can play super aggressively and super physically, right? Because Jonathan Dean, God love him, is 5'9", 165 pounds, something like that off the top of my head.
Yeah, but I mean, we've seen him shut down, like just like last week, right? Like we saw him shut down Wilfred Zaha, who's not like, Zaha is not a, towering mountain of a man or anything like that, but he's a fast player and a player that can be like strong on the ball, physical. He can do the things that, you need strength to do in this game. And so I think Dean can be effective, right? I think that it's like asking Dean once again to like show us something that we've seen flashes of and we haven't necessarily seen consistently for 90 minutes, game in, game out. And that's something that Dean is just like, that's the thing about Dean, right? Like there's a bunch of stuff you're like, okay, that was okay, but we didn't see this. And then he starts doing that other thing. And then it's like, okay, you can do this and this, but we haven't really seen that. And then it just keeps on adding to the skill list. So he may have a ceiling. I mean, he clearly does, but we just haven't quite found it yet. So I think this is a good test for him, but it's the same thing with the entire squad, right? Like, Greg said something that I think was basically that Dean kind of embodies the spirit of the team, with the, performance that he had after the last game. And he didn't just mean for that game. And I think that that's to some extent true, right? Of like the things that the Chicago Fire want to be, of like, yes, he's got skill, but it's more about hard work. It's about that work ethic. It's about that drive. And, I think there have been performances from some key players where I think we've questioned whether they really are showing that drive. Like we talked about it with Gutierrez, who's had a good couple of games and it looks like he's more locked in now. I think honestly, like he's, you said the comparison to Diego Luna, like they are friends with each other. Like they get along. And I mean, they're almost the same age. And I think that on some level it has to be affecting Brian Gutierrez to know that Luna is playing in a Gold Cup final and was the difference maker in the Gold Cup semifinal. And, he wasn't called up. And I think that what he can do about it is what he is doing, right? Which is put together the kinds of performances that we've seen over the past like match and a half or two matches.
100%. I mean, and not to derail the conversation to go in a different direction, right? But like, Diego Luna isn't just like being a difference maker in the Gold Cup, right? Like he's making a case for himself to be the starting left wing at the 2026 World Cup. And, hey, Christian Pulisic, do you mind playing on the right kind of situation, right? The kid is very much, and I'd say you're laughing over there, but it's like, flexibility on one end or the other, right? I guess I should say. We've just
he's proven to be like a useful player. And I think the thing that USMNT fans like about him is just is that he embodies, I think, what a lot of people, especially people of a certain age, grew up really respecting about the U.S. men's national team, which is like they may not necessarily be the most skilled or heralded bunch, although I think there have always been guys that have been those things to some extent. But it's about guys that like put everything on for the badge, wear their heart on their chest, and are just like willing to give it 150% out on the pitch. And that's something that we haven't consistently seen from more recent additions, I think. And I think that's, and again, like the difference between them going back to club form is that RSL are not as good of a team as the Fire. They're not spending anything like what the Fire are. Like they're just not a great team this year, but they've trusted Diego Luna enough to basically not quite build the team around him, because it's the same system they were playing before and that, but like to make him the focus of the team, the like head of the team in some important sense, in a way that the Fire just have not been able to do with Brian Gutierrez. And they're, like I said, about the same age. Guti was a much more heralded player early in his career. Luna had to fight for it more. And I think that comparison, again, the reason talking about all of this is, I've said this before, we still haven't seen there be a match where we see Brian Gutierrez sort of like take the team on his back and create something where the Fire don't necessarily deserve to have it. against FC Cincinnati, they should be able to get some opportunities, especially considering the absences. But they will not have a ton of them, and they need to make them count. And I think that Brian Gutierrez is someone that has the skill to make what could be non-opportunities into real opportunities to score, especially with considering some of the talent in front of him.
Absolutely. And he's got that ability, right? He's got the ability to distribute the ball. And we've, to your point of, can you win a game that maybe we don't deserve to win for us, right? Yeah, that's what the team is asking. And we've seen that from Philip Zinkernagel this year, kind of time in, time out. We've seen it from Hugo Kuipers at times. We've even, I think, seen it from some like unheralded guys, right? Where it wasn't necessarily a win coming out, but performances from guys like, it sounds like off the wall and crazy, but like an Omari Glasgow, right? Like a Jonathan Dean where, hey, you're shutting out Wilfried Zaha for 90 minutes twice in the span of a couple of months. That's not nothing.
Yeah, but I think that it's been like a good, like, again, Guti has more talent than most of the heart sort of players. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he just, coaches that I have talked to for years and talked about how high his talent level is, and we've seen it in spurts. This doesn't have to be a Guti episode, by the way, but he's someone that I think we could be looking for. Like, if the Fire want to get a convincing result here, he's going to need to put on a strong performance. I think somebody else that I think we're looking for is going to be Jonathan Bamba, because he's been pretty quiet lately. I think we've talked about him looking tired. He's clearly had a lot of minutes on his legs over the past calendar year. And so, Greg has talked about the need to sort of like basically try to put games away so you can sub them off ASAP. And look, the Cincinnati defense isn't going to give you a ton of chances, but if you can put a couple chances away pretty early, then I think they get an opportunity to do that. And like, it's just Bamba hasn't done that enough recently, that, you don't have confidence that like, okay, that's going to happen, but he's got the skill to do it, right?
100%. And yeah, I was kind of saying all that with the intent to say like the skill set that Brian Gutierrez has is one that can be incredibly useful in a game like this, where you will need to break lines, you will need to be able to shift through defenses, and you can break out a Jonathan Bamba, you can break out a Hugo Kuipers. And to your point there, Tim, like Jonathan Bamba has a similar tool set, right? He is, I think the first thing we said when we brought him over, right, was like, this is a guy who may not be making the pass or the shot, but he is 100% the guy who can make the pass to the pass. And that has been proven out this year, right? Like he has done a lot of the nitty gritty, a lot of the in the back lines moves at a really high level. I think even more so than some of us expected. He just hasn't had that touch in the final third to actually finish. So some combination of those two guys, I think, is ultimately what's going to be kind of key here, because you need to be able to play those long line breaking passes to actually just flip, if nothing else, flip position, right? Get into an opportunity where you can possess the ball in the final third and be dangerous.
Where you've got numerical advantages and stuff like that. And I think that that's something that we haven't seen enough. I think the other thing is, I think the frustrating thing that fans have felt a lot with Bamba has been, there have been times where he does something very impressive, like a strong take on, like he will dribble past the defender, he will get somebody to commit, right? And then it's like he's got time and space, and he throws a lot of it away, waiting for there to be a pass that he can make or a cross that he can, like a target for a cross, as opposed to doing another take on just on like that last, like the last defender or the goalie or whatever, and getting an actual chance for himself. And like being selfless is great, but there's a point where it's kind of more selfish to not do the thing that you're not comfortable doing and like actually take that shot on net than it is to wait for a lower percentage chance because you don't have the support that you feel that you need on, around you.
What is that old quote? And I wish I could remember the NBA player who said it. He was like, I'd rather go 0 for 20 than 0 for 3, because if I went 0 for 3, it meant I stopped shooting. And I think we're maybe seeing that infect Jonathan Bamba a little bit. Being less than clinical, let's say, in front of goal has maybe tainted him a touch and made him a little bit more reluctant to take those shots, as opposed to, your point, Tim, passing it off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other thing that we've seen, like a lot of the crosses that have made it to Kuipers of the past few games have been aerial crosses, and that just is not really his game. Like he's much better with the ball at his feet than the ball at his head. Not that he hasn't scored some goals off headers, like he has. Like it's not like it's a hopeless thing to do that.
Yeah.
But with Bamba's skill on the ball, and I think sometimes the time and space that he's had, getting the ball to Kuipers in a more controlled situation, like at his feet rather than higher up, I think could have been that I think could help get Kuipers back, propel him up that Golden Boot ranking a little bit with, the opportunities the way he would convert those opportunities, I should say.
Absolutely. Do you guys think they've extended the Golden Boot list to 6 now that Lionel Messi is no longer in 5th, or do you think we can still keep it at 5 and finally show Hugo Kuipers name on there?
They're going to actually take a few players out if they have to, and just have a line of like ... and then have Messi and whatever, like 17 Lionel Messi.
Yeah, that's what would happen. Yeah.
1,000,000%.
Although, you know what? If we were talking about Ronaldo, there would probably be something like his agent would invent like diamond boot or something that had specific criteria just so that like Cristiano Ronaldo would always win it.
Most goals per game against the teams he scored goals against, but not the teams he hasn't scored goals against. Something to that effect. But speaking of guys maybe not showing up, we also coming up next week is the U.S. Open Cup quarterfinal against Minnesota at Minnesota. And I think it kind of brings up an interesting discussion, and one that we haven't really even considered in this conversation, which is, do we see any kind of rotation in the squad? Do we think there would be a benefit to that? We know Greg this year has kind of held this mindset of, you don't need to. You can just keep playing games. You'll get your rest. You'll recover at a high level, and you'll continue to work. That said, the Fire going to Cincinnati on Saturday, then to Minnesota on Wednesday. Meanwhile, Minnesota is playing this tomorrow night, 4th of July, so the day this actually airs. And then they are going back home, playing Wednesday at home. So certainly a little bit of a rest disadvantage for the Fire. And Tim, I'm curious, I know we know what Greg is probably going to do, right? Which is roll out best 11 for both games. That's what we expect. Do you think that's the right move, or do you think there would be a benefit to maybe rolling out a slightly rotated lineup in this game?
I think that's the right way to put it, because I think that would be the smart thing to do, right? Because you have 34 regular season games. Like the Fire are going to have 14 games after this one, whatever happens in this one. They will have no Open Cup games after this one if they don't win it, or at least get a technical draw and like advance in penalties, whatever. And so, but Greg basically said, look, we're trying to win every game. And I think that's what he's going to try to do. I think that where it comes down to is it's always questions of the margin, right? Like if the Fire are up by a goal or down by a goal, does that, do you keep Bamba on longer than you would feel comfortable with trying to get that equalizer or trying to get a second goal or like whatever that situation is? Or do you take him off realizing that like he is a real difference maker and he's also some guy that's not going to give you 180 minutes over the next, few days. But I think that in a lot of ways, though, Cincinnati is kind of an ideal test, whatever the result is in against Cincinnati, because they play in some ways kind of a similar style. Like Minnesota are more extreme in it of like, no, we don't even need that ball. Like you have it as much as you want, and try to punish you by like making you make mistakes playing out of the back and stuff like that. And Cincinnati have a lot of that in them. I think it's going to be good practice for a knockout match for the Fire to have to do it against Cincinnati. And not that like it's just practice, right? Like it's a top opponent that has a lot of skill. And I think that's kind of interesting, is like seeing two teams that are playing similar styles in the course of a week and seeing if the Fire can get results against both, because they felt comfortable with possession against teams that don't want the ball before this season. But Minnesota especially have become experts at, like this team is really good at like they can play through that and blah, 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 blah. And then Minnesota find a way to get a result anyways, like the only, I think they've got 3 losses in the year. I want to say it's like Vancouver and San Diego, I think, opening one season loss against LAFC, maybe looking it up. Yes. I was right about that. So they've had a really strong season. And I think that a lot of teams that are good with possession and getting wins, by playing it, like saying, we can play against teams that play like Minnesota wants to play, of like this, like kind of like anti-soccer. And Minnesota just makes them look like amateurs.
Yeah. 100%. I do think there's an aspect of like, I'm curious to see who makes the bench for this game, just especially with a more depleted bench, right? And this is where, Tim, kind of to your point of, do you take Jonathan Bamba off if you're chasing a goal, right? Do you make the sub off of Hugo Kuipers more quickly if you're up a goal late in the game, right? In maybe the 60th minute instead of the 75th minute. And that's where I'm kind of curious a little bit on who's on the bench and who kind of comes in first. And I think that'll tell us a lot, right? If we see a Jason Shukaluk making another appearance on the bench, if we see an Omari Glasgow potentially coming into a game as opposed to a Marin Haile Selassie, depending on game state and things like that. I think generally, I like what you said. It is probably the smart thing, right, to rest guys and take it a little more seriously. I think in his own way, I think this is Greg taking it seriously, right? This is, to your point, a really good opportunity to test yourself against, one of the only teams in the league who can confidently say they're better than Minnesota, at least on points right now, right? And they play a similar style, and it may even be more difficult just because of the way that Cincinnati actually formulates their defense. So
not that it's, we've talked about, there's been a lot of discourse about like the Open Cup crowds and stuff like that. It's ultimately a lot harder to get people to show up to a soccer match on a Tuesday than it is a Saturday, right? And so both teams have great stadiums with like really good home crowds and all of that. There's going to be a lot fewer people, at the game on Tuesday, just because it's on a Tuesday. And like, that's what we've seen consistently. And so that I think may help you. Now, of course, it's mostly going to be supporters that are going to be loud and in your face, if you're a Fire player. But I think that may also be on the margin, a difference maker. I would be surprised if Shukaluk was given a call up for this match, to be honest. So, maybe for the Open Cup, because there's kind of fewer restrictions around that. You can call someone up for the Open Cup game and it doesn't count as one of their 2 MLS appearances. So that could be a possibility. Honestly, I am very curious about how we see Marin Haile Selassie used over the next couple of matches, because he has been a really strong player in those Open Cup games. And he's been a really good bench option in some MLS games. And I think that it's like, do you take Bamba off and put Marin on? Like, what do we see from Marin? Do you trust Marin maybe to be the starter in place of somebody else for the Open Cup match? Again, just recognizing what he has done in the knockout tournament so far.
Yeah, and we'll have a full kind of preview episode talking about the Open Cup quarterfinal, so we won't get too far into it. I think the one that could be interesting, whether it's Saturday night or Tuesday night, and I realized I've been saying Wednesday night this whole time, but I think it would be curious to me to see, would there be some kind of switch to potentially another 4-2-3-1, right? Just to be something a little more aggressive going forward, especially if you're going to be possessing the ball. And that's where, could you see Marin on the right and Brian Gutierrez on the left, right? Just from the perspective of, can you give him a little bit of interchange with Andrew Gutman? Can you give Philip Zinkernagle space to create in the center? And then you have the speed of Marin Haile Selassie on the right, kind of pairing with, I think, improved passing from Jonathan Dean. The downside being, I think Dean and Zinkernagle have developed a really awesome repertoire down the right side that has been really dangerous. So it'll be interesting to say the least. I'm very curious to see how we roll out Saturday and then Tuesday. I think, Tim, you would probably agree with me that it will likely be the same 11 for both games in the same formation, barring any kind of injury or something like that.
I mean, honestly, my gut feeling is like maybe 9 of the same 11, but yeah, we'll see who plays. I think that seeing how Saturday shakes out will be really useful in talking about that when we have the preview of the Minnesota game. I think that the other guy that we haven't talked about, because Dean has been so good lately, but someone that does have a lot of skill and can be a difference maker in the attack is Leonardo Barroso. With Dean's play, it's been kind of difficult to make a case for him to be getting a ton of minutes, but at the same time, they've been pushing each other, I think, a lot in training at other places. And in both matches, right, like the Fire could be seeking something, just like a little something extra, like a guy that can do one of those line breaking passes out of nowhere, that can like sort of like appear out of nowhere in the box and at a time when you're not expecting a guy from that position to be there. And I think that he kind of gives the Fire that extra dimension in the attack in a way that Dean just really doesn't. It's closer, and it makes it less of a one-sided attack, right? Of like, so much goes down the Fire's left between Andrew Gutman, Jonathan Bamba, and Barroso gives you a little bit more on the right to play behind Philip Zinkernagle and link up with him. So I think that that's going to be interesting to see how he's used on Saturday, and that may or may not tell us anything about how he'd be used on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think the one kind of counterpoint I'd have, and then we can move on a little bit. you're right in just in like the pure like rawness of his game. Leonardo Barroso is just a more threatening attacking player than Jonathan Dean. I think you also have to take into account like he's also more liable to be kind of picked on defensively, right? And he has that great, he's got great strength for his size, he's got great speed, great recovery ability. But when you're talking about two teams who play a very, you take the ball and we're going to make you pay for losing it. That is where I would hesitate to pair Leonardo Barroso, especially next to, all credit due where it is, to Sam Rogers, right? Where it's like not the strongest center back that has been played this year. And while we've seen bright spots, certainly, potentially more so against, I think, Minnesota is where that matchup could be favorable. But certainly against Kevin Denke and Evander, do you want to see Sam Rogers standing next to your more, the guy it's easier to pick on at right back, right? For lack of a better term, versus Jonathan Dean, who we have a lot of criticisms of his offensive game moving forward, but his defensive play has always, the floor has been at a certain level, which is competent, right? And at times we've seen it be very high level, especially for a player of his stature in the league, I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think that's why it's going to be a punching up test for the Fire, right? Like they're going to have to do some things that I think a lot of people don't think that they can do. And I think, game state matters for some of that too, right? Like if you're down by a goal, I think especially with the absences, like guys like Evander and Dinky are going to keep on pushing to get goals, but I think the team may be more content to not really try to go up with more. And then do you risk maybe a player that could give you some more offensive upside? And I think that those are the places, rather than I think the starting 11 and like wholesale formation changes, where I think we're likely to see some of the more interesting sort of explorations of Greg Berhalter's thinking in the next few days.
Absolutely. Awesome. So kind of bring us to our two big pick'ems of the week. The first one, and we don't need to be super long here, but if you have a super long explanation, I guess you can give it. The first one, who do you think your impact player of the week will be? Tim, I'll kick to you first, and then DJ, you better have yours ready, my man.
I think if the Fire, ultimately, we haven't talked about it enough, maybe it's because we don't need to. I think if the Fire are going to pull out a win in this one, it's going to be another, Philip Zinkernagel showing why he's in consideration, if not already locked down to be the team's MVP. Like the Fire will need him to keep on doing the things that he's doing, and that he's been doing, if they're going to get a result.
I'm actually going to go on the other side and say it's going to be Jack Elliott. Jack Elliott has been, I think Elliott's been one of the more underrated players the Fire have had this year. So I think this is a game where he's going to step up and say, listen, I am the defender right now. You're not. He's the only one that, other than Gutman, he's the only center back, because Gutman's the fullback. Yeah. Brandon right now, okay? But Elliott's the only center back we have locked down, without a doubt. He is the team's captain. The only other person right now that would be able to lead the team is Zinkernagel. And I think this is the game, because you're going up against a more offensive Cincinnati, he is going to shine.
Yeah, I like that a lot. To your point, DJ, definitely an underappreciated member of the squad. Just the most consistent week out, certainly on the defensive side. I'm going to go, I wrote two down, so it's a little bit of a cop-out. I do think Jonathan Dean plays a huge role in this game, assuming he starts. We saw Kevin Denke pushing pretty heavily down that left side. I think he'll be tasked with helping Sam Rogers try to control that as much as possible. And we've seen him play some really, really outstanding defense, and that's where it's, can you do it one more time, right? Can you make the big play, not the big plays actually, can you make the little play 20 times throughout these 90 minutes? And if you can, you're putting us in the best possible position to win. The other one we talked about before is Brian Gutierrez, just because his creativity with his passes is going to be key if you want to actually be able to put one in the back of the net against this the Cincinnati side. From there, the ultimate, the most important, the thing we ask every week and the thing we will ask from now until the end of time. Tim, who you got?
Let's say 2-1 Fire win. I mean, they arguably deserved to win last time. It'd be great to see them get one back on the road and continue that road form that we've seen so good from the team throughout 2025.
Love it. DJ, who you got?
I'm going to say it's going to be a very close 1-0 game for the Fire, with probably like a really scrappy goal.
You heard it here, folks. Jeff Gall shutting out Evander and Kevin Denke.
Not Jeff Gall. I'm saying Jack Elliott's going to be the one that shut out. It's going to be the Jack Elliott show. I'll go on with my reaction.
I've got a 2-2 draw. I just see this as a game. Cincinnati's missing a lot on the back line, and I think the Fire will have opportunities to score. We saw them score twice without a great finishing touch last time, and I just think we've seen guys like Kevin Denke be the main problem for Sam Rogers. So I do think, 2-2 draw. Still a positive result for the Fire. I think going to Cincinnati and getting a point, but overall, that's where I'd have it. Fellas, anything else we want to add before we wrap up here? Perfect. I got blank faces. I love it. Like I mentioned before, we'll be back for our normal recap and a preview of the U.S. Open Cup quarterfinal against Minnesota coming up next week on the 8th. As always, give us a follow wherever you are doing your normal social media things. It's Men in Red 97 anywhere and everywhere that you could want to consume soccer content. You will find us posting it. And always, you can check on the site as well, meninred97.com. It's where you can find the wonderful articles, all the latest breaking news, all the updates on roster designations, transfer rumors, all that kind of fun stuff. We are, 3 weeks from today, the transfer window will be open. So make sure you stay tuned, and we will keep you as updated as we possibly can, as fast as our little fingers can type, as it were. Selfishly, I will also shout out, I had a wonderful opportunity to speak with Johan Dykhoff of Soccer Bruins, the Swedish soccer podcast that covers MLS and North American soccer. We had a really cool conversation about American soccer, the Chicago Fire specifically, some of the history of the club and where the current team is at. It's over on our Twitter. We've got it reposted there. So if you could go give that a listen, it would be greatly appreciated. It was a really, really fun conversation with him. It was awesome to go on. And lastly, thank you so much for being here. We do this all because people tune in and listen, and it means the world that you do. As always, thank you so much again for joining us around the bonfire. For Tim, for DJ, for Alan, who can't be with us tonight, for Austin, our illustrious producer. Come on, you Men in Red.